Committee meeting 8:20. We welcome a full contingent of member councillors and a welcome to Councillor Tozer, Councillor O'Neill and our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gates. And also a welcome to the CEO who's going to join us for part of the meeting. And we've got no apologies for committee members, no leave of absences. If we could have a confirmation of the minutes, previous minutes, that's moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Vorster. Thank you very much. All those in favour? That's carried. I haven't received any conflict of interest declarations, so we can move on. We've got 2 starred items and 2 unstarred items. 5.1 is our forward schedule starred and 6.1 is our local area works programs addition, both starred, and then unstarred we've got surf management plan and the Springbrook Cableway. CEO's in attendance today, and just to work in with his schedule, we'll just take the Springbrook Cableway first today, and then we'll go on to our surf management plan. Are we all okay with that? All right, great. Yeah, move the start item. It's Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? That's carried. So we will move on to item 6.3, which is the Springbrook Cableway update report, and I believe we've got a presentation. So we'll go to that first with Rachel. Yeah, welcome Rachel, and Ian, isn't it? Yeah.
Hey, Darren.
Yeah, Darren, and welcome Darren. Great to have you here, and we'll leave it up to Rachel.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We just have a very brief presentation. I'm in charge here. There we go. In 2020, we completed the Pre-Feasibility Assessment for the Cableway to Springbrook, and just a very brief recap. Effectively, it found that there was potential for economic benefit to the city. The Queensland State Government advice at the completion of the Pre-Feasibility Assessment was to undertake thorough and extensive community and traditional owner consultation led by the city as a necessary next step to determine the pre-feasibility or the feasibility of a cableway. Since that time, the council meeting resolved to execute a memorandum of understanding with the state before undertaking any further activities. We were unsuccessful in establishing an MOU with the state in the time since the last meeting. State, through that process and time, has maintained the opinion that thorough and extensive community and traditional owner consultation process led by us is the necessary next step in determining the feasibility, and the report effectively proposes that the city undertakes that consultation as advised. So the next slide is just an extract from the report showing the proposed process. Step 1 being the traditional owner consultation in the first instance, engage with the state to understand their requirements with regards consultation, and to develop a community consultation framework to bring that back for council consideration and decision as to the next step for a cableway. And after that, pending on the decision, continue forth with either the consultation or other activities as decided. So that's really the presentation at this time. Thank you. I'm probably throwing it out for questions, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a few questions about what's brought us to this point, and then what consultation may look like moving forward, and particularly with respect to consulting with traditional owners. Could I just get a sense through you, Madam Chair, to the Director or the CEO, whoever's best placed to answer, maybe our supporting city officers, whether the state's response to us about, I suppose, the onus on us to establish a social licence for the project, is that quite unusual? Because I think about the Currumbin Eco Park, right? The state government came up with a thought bubble, decided that they wanted to deliver an eco park at Currumbin, didn't really consult with anyone, and they've pushed ahead, including with the resumption of land, to make it happen. It appears, and that's an ecotourism asset, so we're told. It appears as though there's a different standard being applied for that project than the one that we're being asked to adhere to. So I suppose, just generally, is it unusual for a state government to ask a local government to go do this work up front?
Through the chair, I would say yes. It's probably, given it's all state government land, we were surprised, and obviously we've, through the pre-feasibility process, have tried to take state government along for the journey and for them to be a part of the decision-making process. But throughout the pre-feasibility process, the state was always, their view was it's a council project, and for us to take on that community consultation piece for the initial engagement. Obviously, through the ongoing approvals process, there would be more community consultation through an environmental impact statement, which would generally be undertaken by a proponent who would be delivering the actual cableway.
So, Madam Chair, through you again to either the CO Director or supporting city officers, it seems as though the state government does offer a framework for applications to be lodged to deliver tourism experiences and infrastructure in national parks, right? And we're effectively proposing to enter into that process, right, that the state has opened up in order to moot a cableway. Is that right? Would you expect that other proposals that would progress through this process would also be subject to the same requirements that we're being asked for?
Councillor, through you, Chair, I think it's just important that we take a step back. So the nature of this project is slightly different to almost any other, that even environmental tourism project, in that it's in the World Heritage Area. So the principal decision maker in relation to this matter won't be the state government, it won't be the council, it'll in fact be the Commonwealth Government. EPBC approval will be required, and in fact there'll be a requirement for consultation with the World Heritage Committee. So this is slightly different to an ecotourism project that's on council land or even on state land or even on land that's in a national park, but which isn't in the World Heritage Area. So no matter what, I don't think anyone would dispute that this will be a controlled action under the EPBC Act, and that a referral will be required and a comprehensive environmental and cultural assessment will be required. So I think the threshold will be higher. So, and the principal decision maker in relation to this matter will be the Commonwealth Government and the Federal Environment Minister. So I think it's just really important that we understand that this is slightly different, and that is in no way to seek to make a judgment on whether it should go ahead or not. That's just the planning process that it will need to go through.
So, Madam Chair, just to provide a bit of context to my questions, I suppose so often we have attempted to go it alone, whether it's a cruise ship terminal or whatever, and the state government, various complexions, I don't want to be accused of, smashing the red guys, they've vacillated and they haven't been reliable partners. So whether it's the cruise ship terminal, a second casino, and now the cableway. And I suppose I'm looking for some assurance from the city officers who are making a recommendation for us to continue down this path, that we're not going to end up wasting our time and wasting our resources yet again, because I would have hoped and expected that the state government might have been a little bit more supportive in their language, rather than even execute an MOU, which might have spelt out some of these requirements, rather than effectively kicking it into touch, which I get the sense that they're doing. So perhaps not for you, Mr. CEO, because you weren't here, but through maybe to the Director, to Darren, do you have a personal sense that it's different this time compared to the cruise ship terminal and the second casino?
Councillor Vaughn, so that's a difficult question to answer right now. So, look, I think what they have set out for us, we have been engaged in a dialogue, and the correspondence shows the depth of that dialogue. So there has been goodwill from the part of the state officers we've been dealing with to enter into a process. We had assumed, based on those discussions, that the memorandum of understanding would have been a good next step to proceed. We're disappointed, obviously, that after all of those discussions, the advice we got back said no. But what they have outlined for us is a process. So the process which is before you all today is a process which takes us along step by step. If it was a holistically negative response from the state, they probably wouldn't have outlined, well, here's a process that you can follow. So I'm positive that there is at least a process before us, that the state have advised, here is what you will need to do.
In order, sorry, Madam Chair, through the Director, then a process that we would, things that we would need to do in order for them to enter into an MOU or to look at entering into an MOU. So I'm just trying to understand whether, if we check these things off, have they committed then to enter into the MOU, or will they take a fresh look at it after we've gone to the expense of doing this homework?
Through you, Madam Chair, they've said that the MOU needs to be entered into with the proponent. So these are steps that they need to be satisfied when they get a proponent before them, that there's been sufficient rigour applied from their perspective before they then enter into that particular process.
Thank you.
So through the chair, just to answer your question, I guess the state government were very supportive of the pre-feasibility process. All the Department of Environment and Science, Department of Tourism and State Development did come along to all the workshops. They participated from an officer level. It was a very collaborative process. I can say that. They gave resources definitely to that whole process. In terms of going forward, and even in the pre-feasibility process, they were very clear about the city taking on that next step in terms of taking this project to the traditional owners and doing that community consultation piece.
Right, so my last question, Madam Chair, which I foreshadowed just on the issue of traditional owners, is, and maybe our CEO is best placed to talk to this, having been involved, I'm sure, with traditional owners in Tasmania, but what does that look like? What feedback would satiate the state government? In other words, do traditional owners need to provide their consent, notional support, open-mindedness? What are some of the, what does the feedback from traditional owners need to look like in order for the government to accept progressing to the next phase? And just wrapped up in that, are we in a place as an organisation to identify who those traditional owners are? And is that a narrow group connected to this country specifically, or is there a broader catchment, a broader traditional owner interest that we must contemplate?
Through the chair. The first step is to identify the traditional owners that exist on mapping, on the Commonwealth mapping. So certainly that's the first port of call, and there are two bodies that pertain to this area. So that would be where we would have to start in the exercise.
Right, and thresholds in terms of do they need to be as traditional owners and custodians of the land, merely open-minded, supportive, ambivalent? What does the government need to see in order to entertain the prospect? Because I suppose what I'm trying to rule out in my head is, if the traditional owners say, no, this is abhorrent, is that effectively the end of the project, or are they merely a voice in the sort of collected evidence that we need to present?
So through the chair, I guess through the MOU, we tried to tease that out of the state government. That's success. And obviously we haven't been able to get to that. But what they have said is that they would continue to provide resources and information to us to help guide us with these questions you're asking, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, a couple of questions. I got a bit confused with some of this correspondence and the timing and dates and so forth and Council's deliberations, but I think what occurred was in May last year, we made a decision that the process should be this, and the first step was the MOU with the state, and beyond that, nothing until the MOU was entered into. That was relayed to the government and to the minister, and we don't seem to have a response from the minister, but we have a response from the Director General, which says, no, we want it flipped. Am I right? Is that correct?
Through the Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. So I echo Councillor Vorster's concerns that the actual requirements of the consultation are not really clear, and we may be falling into a bit of a hole there. Not that I necessarily want this project to proceed, but that's a danger, and we're dealing with public money. And related to that, I see there's a map of the proposed area, and I wonder how that's been defined for the purposes of the consultation with traditional owners. Please, if that could be.
Through the Chair.
Thanks.
So there's two areas outlined on the map. I'll just can put that up on screen here if you like.
Thank you.
So the red is the area of study for the pre-feasibility assessment, and the translucent white area is the area that was identified during the pre-feasibility work as being the area of least impact and most opportunity for a cableway to pass through. So that narrowed the area of interest down to create a focus area for all consultation and further work in this space if it's to proceed.
So if I might, a further question, if we adopt your recommendation today, does that preclude that focus area for community and traditional owner consultation to be expanded or changed in any way? Let's say one of the inputs from the community or the traditional owners is that the area be expanded, that there are particular issues of great concern that they believe need to be considered in the context of this overall evaluation. Is there a suitable flexibility to enable the study area, shall we say, to be expanded?
Through the Chair, the answer is yes, we can expand that area.
Right, thanks.
Yep. So the translucent area indicated on this map includes members of the community and traditional owners that are located exclusively in Division 9, and I talk to them regularly. I'm a bit conscious that every single person I talk to seems to seek more information from me in relation to, on page 111, it talks about our previous resolution and talks about a document called the Strategic Overview for Management for the Gondwana Rainforest World Heritage Area. And they asked me about that. I'm conscious that how do we consult the community about their perception of something with, you know, information that's over 20 years old. There hasn't been any update in that information. So the World Heritage Area is really important to the community. Obviously, we assessed its standard 20 years ago. How do we consult the community? What is the substance of that community consultation with the information that's 20 years old? How do we do that? Or how do we propose to do that?
So I think, through you, Chair, the document you're referring to is a state government document, well, produced by the federal government in consultation.
Federal government, state
federal government document. Yeah. So they have what, in this world, we have what's called the state party. So the state party in this case is the Commonwealth government, and they write management plans. This is an older management plan, but it's still a current management plan. it's not really our place to comment on the state and the of the management plan, but we would use the existing management plan to consult. That's the way it works, and the way it works across all jurisdictions.
So I'm hoping this is allowed to be question 2. So could you give us more information about what that community, I appreciate the traditional owner consultation might be in relation to Indigenous interests, but in this area there are a number of First Nations linked organisations that undertake environmental activity and action. And so my question is, could you give me some examples of what we would be consulting the community about? What does that actually look like? What questions are we asking? What's the scope of that consultation? What are we asking them about this project?
So I'll let the officers answer that, but I'll just make one observation, which is a common misconception, which is that First Nation or Aboriginal heritage, as it's called in the jurisdiction I came from, is about more than just it's about more than just relics, or it's about more than just culture. It's been my experience dealing with First Nation communities for the past 25 years that environment and heritage are the same thing. So when you're talking to an Aboriginal, or as we would call it in Tasmania, or a First Nations community, environment, the full landscape is what you consult on. You don't consult on just the First Nations heritage component. And that would be my expectation and the expectation of the city.
I'm with you on that. Great. Yep. Awesome. So
probably don't need the answer, but if you want some practical examples.
Some practical examples. What are we going to ask them?
Do
you want to go?
Through the chair, thank you. Practical examples, might have to come back to you with that one, but the second step was to actually work with state to identify sort of their interests in that respect up here, and also the traditional owners to understand, the key parameters for the consultation, and that's what we would bring back to the council with the consultation proposal.
So to answer your question in very simple terms, what impact would a cableway have on the landscape from a First Nations point of view in all aspects is the question. And that's what the consultation will be about. It will not be limited in any way other than talking to First Nation communities about their landscape, and by landscape I mean the heritage, the natural and the cultural heritage, getting an understanding about how this will impact, if it will impact, what are ways we might be able to mitigate impact if the project was to go ahead. They're the kind of questions that will be asked, but it is not limited in any way. And going to Councillor Young's point, it's not determined by a grid marking on a map either. It's for First Nation communities, it'll be about the complete landscape, and if it's 3 or 4 metres or 3 or 4 kilometres past a line, that doesn't matter. It's really an open book question about if this project was to proceed, what impact would it have on the landscape, and what could we do to mitigate any impact if there is impact. I don't know if you want to add, but I think.
So the last part of my question, because I'm allowed 3, is it seems like there's lots of connection or synergy between the management plan that is the federal state management plan that's now 20 years old. There are practical recommendations in that management plan that seem almost identical to the type of conversation we might have with traditional owners based on the answer you just gave me. How come we haven't had a recommendation? What's been the reason why we haven't recommended to do both the environmental study and the traditional owner consultation concurrently? What's the biggest inhibitor of us doing those? Because it seems like there's, based on your answers, they seem pretty connected. How come we haven't decided to do them together?
So through the chair, the answer to that is we're following the advice that came back through the state government written to us to undertake extensive consultation with the traditional owners and the community, and we're breaking that up to do the traditional owners first while we prepare the consultation strategy.
Because that's what we were told to do.
That's my 3 questions, so I have respect for that.
Thank you. Through the chair, if it requires the federal approvals through the EPBC, who would make that application?
Right. So there are different models. in most cases it's the proponent, but in other cases that I have been involved in, councils or state governments have done the work on the environmental assessment and then gone to market with the assessment complete. But my understanding is that the current thinking in this case is that it would be the proponent who did that work, or a proponent.
A proponent, and the city doesn't intend to be the proponent.
Not at this stage.
No. So I suppose my challenge is that we sought the MOU in part to de-risk that. And so whilst the state may have provided us with a pathway, the pathway is still not easily achieved, because if we actually need to get to the federal government to get a set of approvals, we almost need to loop back prior to that to get the state on board. So,
yeah.
And I just think that we've reached a problematic stage.
So through you, Chair, in response to that, I would say that projects of this nature are inherently complex. So you will need local government approval, you'll need state environmental approval, you'll need, in this case, approval under the relevant act that manages national parks. And then over and above that, as I've indicated, you'll most likely, almost certainly need EPBC or federal government approval. That's not uncommon, projects of this nature, and there have been two that I'm aware of in Australia recently, which would have gone through that process around cableways. There's always a chicken and egg in this, councillor, about which one do you go for first. Usually speaking, in most cases that I've been involved in, you start at the top and work your way back. So that is to say you get the Commonwealth approval, the state approval, and then the local government approval, but there's no golden rule in that. Sometimes you get state approval first, and then you go and get Commonwealth approval. But so I don't want to give councillors the impression that this is in any way unique, in the sense that across the country, this is how approvals get done of this nature, but they are complex, and there's no rule book for the order in which it happens.
I just had two.
Thank you. And I think the CEO's kind of answered my question. My question was, why has the focus of our MOU and the consultation process started with the state government if it really is the federal government that has jurisdiction because of the World Heritage Area? I wonder why we're not heading towards an MOU with the federal government to get that established first.
Right, so it is important to recognise that the state government are the landowners, so landowner consent is critical in any of this. Now, there are ways you could get approval differently, but at the end of the day, the project doesn't go ahead without landowner consent.
Right.
And usually, in 99% of the projects I've seen or been involved in, you start with the landowner, who in this case is the state government. Now, there may be some land tenure issues, so there might be a bit of council land, but ultimately it would be very counterproductive to do very much work at all without landowner consent, as we know from the local government side of things. So that's why I think the thinking has been that you would work with the state government. I have seen, and I've been involved in a project where local government and state government came together to jointly be the proponent, Councillor Owen Jones, and they did the approval work on a project which required federal approval. But usually speaking, in projects of this nature, landowner is the first point of consultation. It would be a bit odd, councillor, if you were to go off and get approvals and you didn't have the landowner consent. So I think that's the answer.
Thank you. Only had one question.
Efficient.
Thank you, through you. So with this, if this is followed, is that mean that we are asking for the state to say we give landowners consent and then we take it to the Commonwealth? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so I think a couple of points. So the first one is the work that is proposed would form part of the broader assessment that is done for both an EPBC referral and the relevant state approvals, and potentially the local government approvals as well. So it's not sunk work. It's work that has to be done. I think and I'll let Darren correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that the state government have put this additional step in. So they've put this step in to say, go away, talk to traditional owners, find out what they think, and then come back to us, and we'll have a conversation about consent, landowner consent, or about basically endorsing the project. Is that correct,
Okay.
Darren?
Through the chair, that's correct. So we were always de-risking the project through, and I think Councillor Owen Jones raised it last time, a coordinated project. That was our approach. And then through that, you'd get your EIS and also bilateral agreement with the Commonwealth Government around EPBC. So there are other ways or other approvals pathways that you could do to actually split those up.
Okay, so given that, with looking at the recommendation in 3A, it says that we're going to, the Queensland Government will identify interests and requirements and desired outcomes of the consultation. But one thing I think would provide me some comfort in there is if we also get their agreement before we start that consultation, tick off, yes, we like your approach, we're happy with it. Because at the moment it sounds like you're one of our stakeholders, tell us what you think should be in it, but we're not getting their agreement actually on that consultation process.
No, the state. Do you mean the, sorry?
I mean the state.
The state.
And then my third question is about federal.
Okay.
Same thing.
So
but
it's highly unusual to have, I'll go the reverse way, just based on
Yep.
my experience, it's highly unusual to have the federal government enter into a MOU or an agreement that would in any way seek to bind them about their EPBC referral. So generally how it works, and recognising there's a new government, they might be willing to do it, but based on my experience, the Commonwealth don't generally enter into agreements to say, oh, look, we think this is a good idea, because they will say, we've got an EPBC approval process that we need to run. So
Yep.
put your application in and we'll assess it, is their approach. Different to the state government in this case, because the state government are the landowner. So there is a lot of sense in saying to the state government, do you agree with this in principle? Because they're the landowner. They're not
Yep.
simply the statutory approvers from an environmental and a cultural point of view. What I would say, though, is that what's clear is that the state government have indicated to us, and as the director said, we're disappointed about the fact, but they have said to us they're not willing to go there unless we do the First Nations consultation first, which
Yeah.
is why we've come.
So-
and community, yeah.
Yeah, but so my question is, with that, I mean, we've asked them effectively to be someone a group that provides an input into what our consultation looks like, but it doesn't go as far as to say, okay, here's our consultation strategy. Are you happy to sign off on that? So if we conduct by this process, you're going to be happy with the
Yep.
whatever the outcome is, are you going to be happy with the process? Because it doesn't say that in there. And my concern is, similar to others, is that if we do that work and then it comes back and then the process is questioned, not like what the outcome is. And same, I appreciate the federal government not going to say, oh yeah, we'll give you inputs at the beginning, but certainly there must be some kind of guidelines we can look at now when you're allocating that money to do the work.
So I'll answer that and then I'll let Darren have a go. So through you, Chair. So on the methodology and the approach that is used, there are very detailed and I know them well, complex guidelines for how to do this work for the purpose of an EPBC referral. I think it's about a 60-page document. So it would be our expectation that we would use that standard because we know that it's going to be needed down the track. And I would be very surprised if we used that standard if it wasn't a standard that would be acceptable to the state government, because in effect it's the level above of environmental significance. National significance is the test. So that's the process that we would use.
I'm fascinated by this EPBC Act application and whether the state and local government would submit that or whether it was a proponent. Can I just get you to clarify your response to that?
So both so I'm not speaking specifically about this project, but in general terms, I've seen both. Normally, it's the proponent. In most cases, it's the proponent. But where a level of government wants to de-risk the project in such a way that it can proceed, I have seen cases where the state party, which means the Commonwealth government, or a state government, or even local government, have done the work, got the assessment, and then gone to market with the assessment. That is not the model that is proposed at this stage for this project. There's been no suggestion other than that the proponent would do that work. Does that help?
Yep. Is there a mechanism where that management plan from 2000 could be updated? Is there something that it does normally happen?
So management, that's the responsibility of the Parks Service, Queensland Parks Service. It's not and the state party. It actually is the state party, but the Queensland government would do it on their behalf. That's usually how it works. And it is not a small undertaking to do a management plan of area of this significance. I would make the observation though that don't be lulled into to thinking that because a plan is relatively old, it's not accurate. I mean, if you were speaking to First Nation people, they'd say that they've been there for 40,000 years. So, I mean, the plans can be old and accurate. The heritage in the area hasn't changed. So, the management techniques might have changed since then, but it's not uncommon in my experience, and as a former director of parks, state director of parks, to have plans that have ages of this level or more. They might not be written as contemporary in a contemporary way, but the management controls and most importantly the heritage, and I mean both cultural and natural heritage, don't change. So it is what it is. Plus, I would again make the observation that it's not our plan; it's the state party's plan in consultation with the state government.
Yeah. So just a follow-up question there: in the World Heritage Area, does it include council land and national parks, or is it only national parks?
I don't think it includes state, but I have to take that on notice, but I don't think it includes council-owned land. But we'd take.
Did you want to clarify that, Darren? Are you looking at me like you're making eyes?
I'm just trying to think of the mapping. There's 2 parcels.
Yeah, I might take that on notice.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are 2 parcels, but I'm just not quite sure.
And is there any more recent report that assesses either the efficacy or the satisfaction or the Environment Department's assessment of whether that management plan is being executed as it was intended when it was established?
Through the chair, we would have to take that question on notice, but there's nothing that came up in our pre-feasibility process suggesting that they were going to be updating that plan.
I would also add to that having been involved in a number of EISs for projects of this nature in World Heritage areas in my former state, do not underestimate councillors the amount of work that is required to do that. It is a comprehensive impact assessment, both of environmental, cultural, built heritage, and the economic benefits and or otherwise of a project of that nature. It is a significant undertaking, and yes, it will be based off the management plan. That's the cornerstone for how that work gets done. But it is a big undertaking, and it would be very comprehensive before the Commonwealth government or the Federal Environment Minister would be willing to make a decision under the EPBC Act.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think you mentioned that there were potentially 2 First Nation claimants for the area. Has it been resolved at any point in time in regards to who may have priority?
So when we're talking native title, there's one claimant group at the moment,
Yep.
Which is 5 Rivers.
Yep.
For cultural heritage, we believe there's 2 parties going on the mapping, and that's obviously 5 Rivers and Jabree, who were a part of the original claimant group.
And through the chair, and given the importance of the First Nation voice in this process, have we had any preliminary conversations, or have we been approached by either of those parties, and have they voiced any initial indications?
There's been a number of emails and correspondence to QSNTS, who represent Five Rivers, and we've been dealing directly with Jabri as well, keeping them up to date, but there's been no engagement or consultation.
And so there's been no indication from either of those parties whether or not, for example, that they would be interested in being a proponent at some point in the future?
Through the chair, they've obviously been kept up to date on this process and are awaiting us to make a decision on whether we formally engage with them, because we went on hold based on the previous council resolution to go away and do the MOU.
So just to clarify on that, if it's through you, did you mention Jibbery?
Sorry, through the chair, Jabri.
How do we spell that?
Oh, J-A.
Through the chair, JABREE.
That's it.
Thank you. So the names more typically or known to us, I suppose, is the Yugambeh and the Kombumerri. Are they part of Five Rivers? Or?
So the way I understand this through the chair is that the Yugambeh language region, Jabri represents them in terms of cultural heritage.
Thank you.
Title claim, which is not Jabri, it's the other one,
It's Five Rivers, yeah.
Five Rivers. The directors of that entity are connected to the Yugambeh Museum in Beenleigh. And I actually don't know the directors of Jabri. I don't know who they are, but I suspect they may be connected to other people that perhaps aren't connected to the Five Rivers group. I'm speculating, but that's...
So, and Madam Chair, and that's why I just asked about catchment effectively, because the Yugambeh language group, from what I understand, extends all the way to Bow Desert, right? So I think there's an inherent tension in the city as a local government area pursuing a project for our benefit, coming against, clashing with I suppose let's call it the cultural electorate, and the cultural boundaries and the political boundaries don't necessarily align. And my interest in was, to what extent would traditional owners in Bow Desert, for example, who felt a connection to land within our local government area, impact our thinking and decisions locally? So I don't need a response to it, but I just wanted to clarify that that was one of my concerns, because we've got the Kombumerri people, the saltwater people, more, I think, from what I understand, connected with what we would consider the Gold Coast, given its proximity to the Broadwater and what have you. But am I wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think Kombumerri people are effectively south of the Coomera River.
Yes.
So, and Gold Coast clearly stretches north
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
Coomera
okay.
River.
So, no worries. I suppose in my head that was a distinction between Bow Desert and what we would consider our locals. Yeah.
It's also the discussion we've just had through you, Chair, is a good descriptor for why we need to do the work, Councillor, to find out who are the groups who are affected and what impact and what and listen to their voices, no matter where they're from.
And Madam Chair, through you to the CEO, I mean, I'd hope we take a city view that said, do you imagine some of the learnings out of this process may underpin and satisfy some of the work we've identified that we need to do in our corporate plan?
Yes.
Yeah, so effectively supporting this process is a mechanism for us to do some homework that we will need to do anyway if we're to enliven our corporate plan. So it's two birds, one stone. Yep.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It was really just a comment, and that is looking at the Queensland Government website for the Gondwana Rainforests. The first thing they say is we recognise the traditional custodians, and they mention the Yugambeh, Yugara, Agarapul and Githable people in the first part, and then goes on to list a whole range of family names. I'm actually really interested in seeing the body of work to know what their views actually are. And the reason I say that is because I think a more contemporary approach to their First Nations input has already been recognised as being required by the state government, because they've said that there had previously been 2 management committees, a community committee and a technical committee, effectively, and that in actual fact they're looking to establish a greater input from the local Indigenous people. So I think this is going to be, they say down here, had previously had 2 advisory committees. The department identified the need to enhance the participation of First Nations people in the governance and management of the World Heritage property. Accordingly, an extensive program of consultation in both Queensland and New South Wales with First Nations people with rights and interests in the property is underway to inform new culturally appropriate advisory committees. So I think there's probably a parallel body of work that's going on by the state government in consultation with the New South Wales state government in this space. So I think the timing of it is probably as good as we could hope for.
Councillor Young?
Thank you, Chair, through you to the CEO. The city did at one stage in the past have a dedicated officer responsible for engagement with First Nations people. Is that still the case?
Yes, that is the case.
And who does that person report to, please?
So through the chair, it sits in legal services.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Young. I'll just go to Councillor Tozer and then...
So my last question actually relates to economic feasibility. It talks about in the report that there's a $35 million or thereabouts on page 112 revenue generation for this. I'm trying to draw on the CEO's experience with these matters before. To what extent did the proponent of a cableway execute obligations under a World Heritage Management Plan in delivering, that project elsewhere? So what portion of that $35 million worth of revenue generation was allocated towards, and to what extent did they do the work, meet those obligations?
Okay, so as I indicated, there are multiple models. So the first, but generally speaking, no matter who the proponent is or who's doing anything inside the World Heritage area, they are required to operate in a manner consistent with the management plan and with the controls that are set out in the contract. In terms of who does what, I've seen the whole gamut, Councillor. I've seen, and I'm not talking about Cableway specifically, I've seen fully run proponents who've come in and said, we want to do X, Y and Z. They've done all of the EIS, they then operate it, and they operate on a lease or a licence, depending on the nature of the activity. I've been involved in projects where inside the World Heritage area where the state government, not the state party, I know it can get confusing, but the state government has been the owner operator of the venture. So if it's a guided walk or if it's a ferry service. In relation to Cableway, I'd probably defer to Darren, who will know that the obvious one being to our north in Cairns, where I understand it's a PPP as well, where there's some state government ownership and some private, but it's run by a private operator. That's correct, isn't it, in Cairns, Darren?
Through the chair, that is correct. It's obviously a private consortium, but they do obviously have partnerships with state government for that particular project, and it's in our feasibility as a case study as well.
Can I just add one other point, which may go to your question, or it may not, through you, Chair, and that is, generally speaking, the larger the infrastructure spend required and the more expensive the ongoing costs are, the more the project needs to be de-risked in order for it to happen. Does that make sense? So if you're, it is a big undertaking for any private sector individual or organisation to go down the path of a very complicated and expensive EIS for infrastructure in the World Heritage area, with knowing that you've got to get those 3 levels of approval done. So that's why you tend to see market intervention by state, federal or local government to seek to de-risk the projects in some way.
So I think my question is is it fair to expect the community to expect that the proponent, out of the $35 million in revenue generation, will meet some of the obligations in managing the area that they're proposing to impact? Is that a reasonable expectation?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yep.
Thanks, councillor Tozer. We'll close the questions there. So we've got a recommendation in front of us, councillors, and we'll take that to the vote. So also moved by councillor Vorster, seconded by councillor Caldwell. All those in favour? And those against? Councillor, did you want your votes? Yeah? Can I be recorded? Yeah. Councillor Peter Young and Councillor Owen Jones would like their votes recorded.
So, Madam Chair, I know
That's carried.
I know it's been carried, but just because this is so contentious, would you grant me just to make one remark so people can understand why it is we're supportive of moving this recommendation? Madam Chair, as we heard from the CEO, our new corporate plan talks about engaging with the Yugambeh language group. It's important work that needs to be done by the city, and I actually believe that this process affords us an opportunity with a purpose to seek out those traditional owners who have a stake not only historically in the Gold Coast, but a stake in it moving forward. And I think this process affords us a good opportunity to understand their aspirations, their cultural value that they attribute to the Gold Coast. And even if this project isn't ultimately progressed, at least we'll have a sense of what may be possible for the Gold Coast when we work in partnership with our First Nations peoples. So I think for the sake of the process and what information we may gather in carrying out the process, I think there's real value to be had. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor Vorster. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Mr CEO, for attending and your input, your learned input. We'll go to item 6.2, which is our surf management plan 5-year review, and we've got.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Losing my voice. Yeah. We've got Shannon Hunt here just to quickly take you through this, councillors. You may recall that we regularly come back with a review of the surf management plan. It's that time again for the 5-year review. And the focus on this particular review has been around surf etiquette, a very timely topic. At the moment, given recent circumstances, and we can demonstrate some work which has been undertaken by council officers fairly recently and road tested at World Surfing League event, and we'll show you some of that collateral today. So I'll hand over to Shannon to take you through it, and then we'll take some questions.
Sorry, thank you. So just briefly moving through some content regarding the Surf Management Plan 5-year review. Obviously, the Surf Management Plan was resolved in 2015 as an action from the Ocean Beaches strategy, and contains 3 broad objectives around visitors and resident surfers, understanding surf etiquette and amenity on Gold Coast beaches, that the management of surf amenity on Gold Coast beaches is best practice, and that there's joint stewardship in the management of surf amenity. The report today presents the content of the draft 5-year review of the Surf Management Plan, proposed to undertake stakeholder engagement through the city's World Surf Reserve Local Stewardship Committee, and that following the engagement process, a final report is brought back for Council's consideration. Broadly, the review outcomes just show that projects that the city's undertaken have contributed to an enhancement in surf amenity on Gold Coast beaches over the review period. And some of the significant achievements more recently, as Elton mentioned, relate to surf etiquette and animations, which is a real focus over the next 5-year period. The animations themselves, we have some of them to present this afternoon. They're generally around specific concepts around how someone can be safe in the surf and demonstrate good etiquette and consideration of other surf users.
Dropping in on another surfer's path is disrespectful and dangerous. If you drop in, kick out of the wave as quickly as possible. Go! Be a good surfer. Share waves, smiles, and good vibes. Paddling around other surfers to take the inside position is called snaking. It's considered extremely poor behaviour. Let the other surfer go. Good things come to those who wait. Be a good surfer. Share waves, smiles, and good vibes. Always wear a leg rope. Stray surfboards can harm others. Never let go of your board, especially if there are other surfers behind you. Avoid paddling directly behind another surfer. Instead, choose a clear passage. If you're in another surfer's path, show direction and paddle toward the white water. Be a good surfer. Share waves, smiles, and good vibes. Surfers often share coastal bars, seaways, and river mouths with powered craft. Collisions can cause serious injury or death.
Okay, sorry.
Be a good surfer. Be aware, look up, and live.
Sorry. So that's just an example of some of the animations.
I want to hear some more of Herman's Kiwi accent. No?
And for the record, those tuning in, I have got a New Zealand passport.
Just one of your passports.
There's one of the passports.
That's
My division, it's a bad photo, sorry.
Hey, team. So those videos were great because they had a real sense of place. I mean, they were like, you could recognise all the headlands and they were very connected to the Gold Coast. Can I just ask, who led that creative brief? Because I'd like to flick them an email and congratulate them because it doesn't feel generic.
through the chair, that was just within the city assets team. So
It's something we deliberately tried to do to make it very specific to the Gold Coast.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think the risk with these information campaigns is you can have an important message, but it's told so generically it doesn't connect. And I'm actually looking for the next video because I want to see more local icons. So, well done for that.
Yeah.
Campaigns use stock photos and generic material.
Can I?
Well, from our World Surf Reserve meetings and that we had, that was a lot of the input that came back through, was that they needed it to be relevant to, and especially with the surf etiquette style of things, that they wanted it to be relevant to the World Surf Reserve part of it too. So obviously with the local stewardship and that,
Yes.
that information being fed through.
So,
That was exactly my point, Councillor, because the stewardship committee, they go through surf etiquette comes up every meeting, and we have the input of the local surfers, and we have the input of the city assets guys, the coastal management guys, and I think it's a worthwhile committee. We always get something out of it, and I just think this has been a fantastic campaign. Can't wait to see it all over the online stuff.
Thanks, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Vorster?
Madam Chair, we didn't get to see all the videos, but maybe you're best placed to answer this question. A lot of the messaging was around the potential troublemaker, right? So the person snaking or the person dropping in and all the rest. I just wonder whether there was any messaging around anger management because, like, for example, allegedly, if you read the Gold Coast Bulletin, some bloke bashed a bodyboarder today who was potentially a novice. So have we put in any messaging around, hey, when things do go wrong, don't bash someone? Because that's actually the outworking of the etiquette problem. Do we have any of that?
We haven't specifically addressed that. So I guess it's implicit in the different areas that we've looked at, but not called it out as, you know, an item on its own. So I guess it's something we could do. This is really the first phase to test on how this goes.
Yep.
So it's something we could look at.
I think you'll have great success, but I've got a couple of mini mells at home. I'm definitely not a pro surfer, I can tell you that. Last time I went out, I cut up my left knee pretty badly at Miami. Haven't been out since. But I actually feel discouraged from actually getting back in the water because of the congestion and the number of people who are more experienced being out there. And I just hope as we develop this campaign, we start talking about the more experienced surfers who may feel a connection to a break, just being a bit more patient with people starting out in the surf and being a little bit more forgiving. Sorry? A learner's bay?
Learner's bay.
Yeah, bay.
By professional surfers.
No, surf beach.
I don't know. I'm not a surfer.
So a bit going back to that, and what Councillor O'Neill and myself were both saying, that's again something that comes up at the meeting all the time, as into how can the seasoned surfers better deliver a message to those novice surfers, and perhaps as Councillor Gates said, identifying the fact that if you're a novice surfer, you would potentially not use your first opportunity in the surface to be snapper or to be burley point or things like that, as to identify some areas that are probably more conducive to beginner surfers getting there, you know.
Are the waves as good at some of the other beaches that we could identify?
Yeah.
It would be great to have an area where little children, for example,
Or even heavier counsellors.
or big boys like Herman could go and learn the craft.
Councillors, this is exactly what Shannon and his team are working through at the moment. They're looking at the 23 different beach components and looking at what uses are best in each area, which will tease out exactly that. Where would more experienced surfers be compared to less experienced surfers, and then how do we support that with signage and messaging?
Well,
So
it's
they're
the one
engaging that
benefit
work
we
right
have,
now.
55 kilometres of beachfront, so we should be able to accommodate everyone and take care of the little people and the learners.
Absolutely right.
And the big boys.
And the big learner and the big boys.
And I think a lot of our board riding crews are doing that. The
Yeah.
board riders and the Currumbin board riders and the Burley board riders, they're all starting to identify that potentially if you're a novice surfer or joining part of those groups, we'll take you through some sort of education where it's better to surf.
Well, it's like the buddy system in the schools, isn't it? It would be great too if the more experienced surfers, when they had time, could offer a little bit of guidance.
Beach buddies.
Yeah, beach buddies.
Better than being bashed about the head.
Yeah. So, and they also tested these with the World Surf League, these animated videos, and they were very well received. So it's the sort of thing that a lot of those novice surfers are going to be able to relate to as well. So rather than...
Just one more.
O'Neill.
Just one more point too. The Learn to Surf schools have a role to play in this,
Yes.
and I'm not sure. I mean, I know they do go through surf etiquette, but I think they could do more with the learner surfers, and they will pick the beaches that learn with the smaller waves, and it's usually Currumbin and Greenmount where our Learn to Surf schools are, where it's safer for the Learn to Surf kids. But it's not always kids. They have adult surf classes as well, and we're having one in the day coming up down at Currumbin for the Olympics Day that we're going to have. So come along, Councillor Gates.
Thank you, councillors. So we've got a recommendation there in front of us. If I can have somebody move that. Moved by Councillor Owen Jones, seconded by myself. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, did we have any GB items today? No, we didn't. Do I close the... Yeah. Councillors, will close the meeting at 2:04 p.m. and if we could just get you to hold back and we'll just have a chat on